Hi, in this episode I'll be talking to my friend Kieran Hatton about everything someone looking to get themselves a closed circuit rebreather would like to know. Over a brew, I get as much knowledge from Kieran about my chosen unit, the JJ-CCR, and in as layman terms as possible, he answers all the questions I put to him to allow me to make an informed choice about both instructor and unit. Do you fancy a brew? How's it going, mate?
Yeah, not too bad. Yourself?
All right, I've got the noisiest chair. Can you hear that chair?
Yeah.
One sec.
I'll survive. You're all right.
I'll not. It'll break me by the end of this. All right, Kieran, welcome to Fancy a Brew podcast. If you want to give us a bit of an intro to who you are, and we'll just see how it goes and flows from there.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm Kieran Hatton. I work full time in the diving industry and have done for quite a while. Teach rebreathers primarily. Run trips to. Well, we used to run trips to different parts of the world, but I don't know what we're doing at the moment. And if this isn't going out for a little while, God knows what we'll be doing by then as well.
Might be locked down again.
Yeah, who knows? You know, no one's going to listen to me. No point worrying about it, is there anymore? You know, I think I'd just crack on when you can crack anymore on COVID already into 2 minutes. But yeah, been diving just over 20 years now, full time in the industry for. Must be 15 years now, and maybe I've been diving more than 20 years. Anyway, Dad was a diver, that got me into it.
Nice.
I liked it, and I still like it. So take a few photos, teach a few classes, lead a few trips. But like when you work in diving, I would say very few people have one job in diving. You do anything you can to sort of tick over and keep going and keep the interest as well. So I lived down in Plymouth, used to live in Orkney, from the Midlands originally, and so
you've been about the UK a little bit then. I like it.
Yeah, I would say I'm reasonably well travelled, but the UK as well, you know, and I still go all four corners of the UK for a variety of different things.
So what made you turn pro, if that's the right term? What made you start doing it for a living as opposed to a recreational diver?
I don't know, insanity. I went away to Australia in 2003 with my girlfriend at the time, and before I went, I'd come through the BZAC system. But before I went, I crossed over to Paddy because I thought, well, I'll have a go at the sort of dive bum thing. Yeah. So went over to Australia, did a bit of dive mastering, did my instructor course in Australia, and you know, I enjoyed it. I never wanted to come back from Australia, so but they wouldn't have me. Apparently, there is not a shortage of diving instructors. Who knew? And came back to the UK and came back into the UK in the June. So wanting to do a summer season, I trained. There used to be a company called Deep Blue run by Rich Stevenson. Yeah, and they ran like a Watcher and Seeker and a few ribs and different things at the time. And I was obsessed with wreck diving and tech diving. Had been before I went to Australia. In fact, it was probably one of the things that counted against Australia was they didn't have access to shipwrecks and such like that in the way we did. And it certainly wasn't doing the tech diving in the way we were those years ago as well. Yeah. But that's not why I didn't stay. I literally didn't stay because they wouldn't have me. So I had to live with those problems. So I came back and I wanted a job with Deep Blue and I sort of got in touch and got a job with them and carried on with them. And then from then, you sort of, in the early days, there was no winter work. So I went back to a friend of mine had an electrical and data installation company. And he's helped me out loads of times in life. You know, I've got a 3-month winter window where I needed to get a job, but it's difficult to get a proper job for 3 months. And 3 months of that convinced me that I want to go diving again. And pretty much that's what I've done since.
Right. What about these expeditions that you run then, or trips? Whereabouts you go?
So the sort of expedition's a funny word. You know, one man's expedition is another man's package holiday. Yeah. And I won't lie that if what I would call an expedition to go on is probably not what I sell. I don't sell it as an expedition. Right. You know, if you want to go on holiday and basically be told where to be, when to be there, and have a great time, then you know I can make that happen. So over the years we've done Norway, Croatia, Scapa, Finland, Truk, the Maltas, caves in Florida, caves in France, all around the UK, Ireland, Malin.
Yeah.
So yeah, done it. But equally, you know, an expedition isn't packing 2 suitcases and driving to Heathrow.
No. I guess I call it that. Coming from a military background, the expeditions, that's what we used to call them, were not like a ski trip that the military would go on. The ski trip literally was, you go to the airport like it's a holiday, you get to wherever like it's a holiday, but you're just told 7 o'clock you need to be up for breakfast because we're catching a coach to the ski lift for 9 o'clock. Whereas a dive trip or dive expedition, we had a purpose. You know, not only would we be training lads through the BSAC syllabus, or girls, whoever, but we'd also be getting some training. So the first one I ever went on was like an angel shark expedition. So we were taught about them and we dived on them and we measured them and we do water samples and all the rest of it. Whereas, like I said, the ski trip, as soon as you've done that first descent to the mountain, lads would be on the piss. You know, they'd be straight for après-ski at like 11 o'clock if they could, and be on the piss all night. So we'd loosely call it an expedition, but that's probably why I'm coming from that sort of background, calling it that.
You're not alone. Whereas an expedition
proper,
I guess, is when you're going somewhere new and you don't know what the logistics are, and you've maybe had to take all of the, you know,
all your gas
ship
and
all your gear and prep your own gases, you know, dropping your cylinders in for filling at the gas room while you go for dinner and a little après.
Yeah.
Sprinter on the sun terrace is not expedition diving in my world, but that doesn't mean it's not good fun, and it definitely does not mean that I don't enjoy it or that I would not try to offer it to folk. Yeah.
So what's the crack? Have you got blown out this week? When we spoke the other day, you weren't diving?
We're supposed to be finishing off a trimix class. We get some unsettled weather, don't we? The tail end of the hurricanes come across the Atlantic, so we were due to be in Weymouth finishing off a CCR Normoxic Plus class, but yeah, it's too windy, so we're not, basically. So, but it's been good. You know, it's been 6 weeks of non-stop diving, which after a long layoff has been really nice to get out and do a bit again, and bit of teaching, bit of trips to Malin Head, bit of time in the water with the camera. So yeah, all good.
Is COVID and the lockdown bit, has that been pretty epic for business, or have you managed to sort of do a reset and look at what's going on in the world for you?
Oh, it's a disaster, isn't it? But you know, I mean, yeah, it has been, is, and will be a disaster. But like, I've got a really dry sense of humour, and you know,
you've not, have you?
Yeah, I know I hide it well. I like to take the piss out of what's been, but you know, when you put your actual sensible head on, there is no point in sitting here whinging about what was. You either adapt, move forward, or die, don't you?
Absolutely,
really. So I think my take is I keep planning everything until they tell me that I can't do it, and when they tell me I can't do it, I'll go back to the drawing board and plan again. What else would you do?
No, you can't, can you? Like I say, you're just going to die. Well, let's get on to the real reason that we're talking anyway, because I've got an opportunity, a reason, a want, a need, whatever you want to call it, to move forward sort of in my training from open circuit, getting a closed circuit rebreather and doing some training. I asked around. Your name was bandied around twice, more than everybody else's. So I came to you for a chat, and then...
Yeah, so from my side then, we chatted, obviously hooked up on the old FaceAche Messenger.
Yeah.
I'll have flicked that across to email because it's just easier to keep track of, and then you've got the sort of standardised questions at the beginning. And the thing with CCR training now is there are just so many routes into it. So sort of 10 years ago, most people followed a single path into rebreather diving, but now you can come into it as a recreational diver. You know, you can come into it as a trimix diver, and there's a bit of allowance for that. You can come into it as a sort of advanced nitrox deco procedures diver, which is where you're at, which is the other way into it. So yeah, so it's always good to get a grounding. From my side, I also want to know, you know, are you diving? Are you diving regularly? Are you used to diving in a dry suit? Because as bizarre as it sounds, you'll get the odd person. If it doesn't, you know, that's not a crime not to dive in a dry suit, but the last thing you want to do is sell a course in the UK to someone who's used to diving in a 5mm shorty or whatever. So I had a look through your information, and you know, you would, you know, on paper be in the right sort of place to be thinking about making a move to CCR. You're at that cusp, I'm guessing, where you've got your advanced nitrox deco procedures. The next logical course, tech-wise, this is on open circuit would be to go trimix. Is that a particularly viable option in the world today? Not in my opinion. You know, the course for learning, etc., is never going to be a bad thing. But how many times are you going to spend 200 or 250 pounds filling a twin set with gas? And you know, the recent trips in Ireland, it would have been that and more to gas up for a dive. Frightening. And you would, as a advanced nitrox deco procedures, or Tech 50 if it was PADI, or advanced nitrox if it was IANTD, that's sort of the traditional Mod 1 route. That's when there was only Mod 1, that's the sort of level it qualified here at. 40 meters, limited amount of deco, either limited by the agency or limited by a single bailout bottle. You know, it fits into that category. So yeah, that's where I would put you. And as we sort of chatted on the email, I would, like, you want to arrive at a CCR class and learn the CCR. So if you arrive dive fit, it doesn't even matter if you dive in a single cylinder in 10 meters of water. If you're just used to being in the water, it means when you rock up on your CCR class, you can learn the CCR, not remember how to dive.
Does that happen often? Obviously, you maybe weed that out though through your email chat, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I definitely try to, you know, and just, it's a better experience for the student, and it's a better experience for me if people arrive dive fit. But there's always curve balls. You know, this year's a massive curve ball, isn't it? Nobody's had a busy spring, and you know, quite often traditionally I'll run classes in March out in Malta or Croatia, and people book them in the November, and you have to remind them that they still want to be doing some diving over the winter. So you know, March comes quick, doesn't it?
Yeah, real quick.
Can't come quick enough at the moment, I have to say. But kiss goodbye to 2020. But so I also try to provide honest information. You know, I would rather get somebody when they're at the right place in their diving to make the leap to CCR, and if that meant waiting 6 months or waiting 12 months, then that's better, because you want them to take to it, enjoy it, because then they'll want to come along a trip or an expedition and take the next class when they're ready, etc. If it's been a positive experience, if it's been a battle and they've left feeling like they've done 10 rounds with Tyson, then less inclined to.
I've definitely felt that on a few courses before.
Yeah, I mean, CCR training's a really big week, so there's a fair amount of diving to do. So normal CCR class will be 5 days. So I'd structure that as day one as classroom and equipment prep, and we'd aim to do what I call a dry dive as well, last thing that afternoon. So you know, we've got the units prepped ready for diving, then we'll just go through a few of the core skills that we're going to do in the water on land. They're not quite the same, but if you've just had that mechanical process of feeling where buttons are, feeling what happens to the loop and the lung, then it's a massive head start when you get into the water. So you've got 5 days. Across those 4 days where you're actually diving, we've got to do at least 8 hours basically in the water, which doesn't sound much when you say it quick, but actually a couple of hours of diving a day is more than most people do most of the time. You know, so you've got the tiring element of it. If the water's cold, you know, that saps heat out of you as well. And the other thing as well is depends where you're doing the training. So if you're UK training in the winter, when you get out of the water after your second dive, you'll not have much daylight left, and you know, you've got to strip the unit, prep the unit, etc., etc. So Mod 1's really intensive from an activity level, but also from an information level. And it's like I start talking at the beginning of the week, and I'm still talking at the end of the week, and it's gone like that. And all of that is important information that you're trying to absorb. And you know, we're obviously repeating some stuff, and then there comes a point where it's me questioning, going, well, why are you doing that? Doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, but you want to know that come the day after the class, when you go diving your rebreather, that stuff's gone in. So it's a really busy week. So trying to set that up, make sure people have got all the information, make sure we've got the logistics in place so that you can just focus on stuff has been is really important.
Are you solely JJ, or do you do other?
No, so I can teach on 4 units.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm active on 4. So inspo, inspiration, all the variants, JJ and the JJ-CCR are the sort of active ones. Do have an instructor ticket for a Megalodon as well, which was perhaps initially at the time maybe more to help people coming through with trimix training, just for the fact that the Meg's a nice unit, was just not readily available at the moment. So I wouldn't say that's a current one for me.
Right.
I've dived a few of the others as well, but they're what I teach.
How would someone, before they chose their instructor...
You're implying there are other instructors?
Well, there was other... when I asked around, but your name was top twice. So what can I say? I've come straight to you. I've not gone anywhere else. But
there are no others. There are no others. I think they've all packed up.
But would you suggest then that you choose your unit that you want to dive before you choose your instructor, and then obviously you'd marry the two up? Because there's no point choosing one unit and then your instructor doesn't teach that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know is the honest answer. So people come to you for all sorts of different reasons, don't you? So sometimes people will come and train with me because maybe they've done previous training courses with me, open circuit, or you know, their friends have, or you know, word of mouth is so important, isn't it? You know, there's no doubt about that. Or
absolutely,
they've been on a trip, so they would probably then pick up the phone and they might seek my counsel about what I think would work best for them. And I guess most business comes roughly in that way via word of mouth or something. It was very, very, very rare that you just get a complete inquiry out of the blue of somebody who's you know, never spoken to you, never done anything, doesn't know anyone that's trained with you. That's pretty unusual. The other way is obviously the unit. So sometimes people they'll have already picked which unit they want. So once they've done that, then that's already narrowed the pool of available instructors. So I think it goes both ways. I think it goes, I think it goes both ways. So like if you've already had in mind maybe that the JJ is the unit that you're looking for, so you ask around about who trains on the JJ. You know, it's lovely that my name's come up, but that's sort of already narrowed that pool down. Whereas if you'd have decided that you wanted a Revo, for example, my name would if you'd have asked in that circle, my name would never ever have got in the mix because it's not one that I teach on. So I think it's sort of that's how there is one of those two paths. I would say people normally.
So how would you go about choosing one? Or that if I came seeking your counsel and said, yeah, Kieran, how do I decide? How do I even know? I know what kind of diving I like to do and where I would like to dive.
If you don't know what unit you want, then I run in a normal world.
Yeah.
I run tri-dive days, so you can come down and meet up nearly always at a quarry for those, just because it's always high tide, it's always slack water. The ease for that, and come down and try 1, 2 or 3 units, and I try and run them not like a tri-dive in a swimming pool where the unit's just strapped on your back and you're chucked in the water and you fight it in 1.5 meters for 20 minutes and then get out, and that's great fun, but you don't learn anything. So try and do that again, little bit of theory, understand what's going on with the rebreather, bit of dry diving them again on the surface. Not obviously all the skills we do on a class, but a couple of skills, how to bail out primarily, just in case you decide you don't want to be a rebreather diver after all. And then get in the water, run through in the shallows, and then go for a swim in sort of 5 to 10 meters of water, where you actually get a chance to feel what the unit's doing, and but equally it gets a chance to settle into the dive and do it. So if people have got absolutely no idea what they'd like, then that's the option that I would give them. Yeah. But equally, if people already know what they want, then that's what they want. And I think the conversation I do have with people a lot is, well, I can afford this one today, but what I'd really like is this one. And I would nearly always say, well, the difference is this, just wait until you've bridged the gap. Because if you buy what you don't want, you're highly unlikely to ever really feel as if it's what you wanted.
Yeah.
That's not to say that everyone who comes on a try dive day doesn't arrive thinking, well, I'd like this one, but actually prefers the other one and buys a different one. That happens as well.
I mean, the standout things for me with that particular unit, the JJ, is it's got a shear water computer with it, which is what I use already. So I'll be relatively familiar with the settings and setup of that. It's a backplate harness and wing, which I already use. So in some respects, it's going to be very similar on my front. I like that. I like the look of it. And that's where I draw the line. I don't really know much more else. Honestly, I don't.
I think when the JJ came out, 10 years ago now, it's just over 10 years since we got the first ones. It was like a backplate harness wing. That was completely the revelation of it. It was like strapping your normal kit on. So whereas the Inspiration, which is a phenomenal unit, and I would not sit here and knock chunks off any of them, to be honest, because they all have pros and cons. Like if you're used to a buddy commando, then the Inspiration felt like home. They're wicked down there at Houston, but they've got a sewing machine and they're not afraid to use it. You've got Velcro hoops and hooks and clips and everything that you could do. But then the JJ was the complete opposite to that. It was your backplate harness and wing that you were used to, with a couple of little T-pieces on the shoulder. So and it's really neat and it's really streamlined in the water. It feels, it's a joy to dive. It is an absolute joy to dive. There is no doubt about that. And like you say, the electronics are a really nice interface and simple to use, and you're already familiar with them. It makes a lot of sense. But then there are a lot of rebreathers out there now with shear water electronics on. When the JJ started, there was the JJ, and now probably half the market has got shear water electronics on.
How does it compare to the XC? Is it quite similar?
To the XCCR?
Yeah.
Well, the electronics are exactly the same. So the XCCR is running on shear water electronics, and it has a few more features on the XCCR. So it's got CO2 sensor, etc. in. But in terms of how they feel and how they work, they're exactly the same but completely different, if that makes sense. So they're both rebreathers. They've both, if you put a similar size scrubber in them, they've both got comparable durations and all of that. But the actual diving of them, if you know both, it feels different. So the design of an XCCR has the solenoid before the scrubber, whereas a JJ-CCR has the solenoid after the scrubber, right near the sensors. So for me, how I feel it, I can't speak for anyone else, the PO2 control, whilst I'm sure at the mouthpiece very stable, varies greater on the XCCR. The solenoid works harder. My loop volume control is less stable, and I use a third more gas on the XCCR than on the JJ in this comparison. But that would be the same if you compared the Meg to the JJ, the Inspo to the X. They're just slightly different styles of plumbing, really.
Right. Is there a massive disadvantage to it not having a CO2 sensor?
Not for me. It's the holy grail, isn't it? Yeah. So if it's the holy grail, we'd have all bought the first rebreather that came out with the CO2 sensor in, but we didn't, because they're unreliable. And The problem is if something's unreliable too many times, you stop relying on it. And you know, so if your handset alarms CO2 in front, it doesn't matter what make of rebreather you've bought now. So I don't know if you've got a Sentinel, XCCR, an Inspiration, whatever. So it says CO2 alarm. The only thing you should do is bail out. But there is portions where people have the CO2 alarm so often that they're like, it's fine. It's just moisture on the sensor. Yeah, and you know, they are. We had that in a class last week. Jump in the water, CO2 alarm. You know, and I would have been 99.9% confident that that was moisture on the sensor. Second dive of the day, student had, I don't want to say laid on his back, but, you know, leant on his back, swimming on the surface. Moisture's pulled down there. It's got a knacker as soon as we jump in the water on the second dive. But you can't do anything other than bail out and come up. You know, what if I wasn't right? Yeah. So you have that many false positives, if you like. In my experience with them, that in the end they end up turned off, and then you might as well not have it in the first place. Right. Or to live with it, you've got to pop the head between dives, get the head dried, etc., and then it'll probably work really well. But that's not always possible with where if you're diving offshore, weather, wave, wind, rain. You know, it just so for me. No, I couldn't give a monkey's whether it's got a CO2 sensor or not. The key's all in the prep, and it doesn't matter if you've got a sensor or not got a sensor. If you haven't done the prep, the job's buggered. All the P's. Prior preparation prevents
piss poor performance.
There we go. I was going to say with the rebreathers, I'm not a faffer. You'll go away on a trip and you'll see people that are pulling bits off and putting bits on, and you know, it's never ending. I wouldn't put myself in that category, and if somebody likes to screech up to the boat 2 minutes before it leaves the pier with a bag of bits in the back of their car, a rebreather just definitely isn't the thing for them. My sort of methodology is if you have half an hour in the garage or the workshop before the weekend's diving, before the week's diving or whatever, you'll do most of your prep there. Yeah. And you've probably got 10 or 15 minutes more each day than you would have diving open circuit. So it's nice and easy, and there's no, but if you don't look after it, then you'll get all the annoying little problems and the little niggles and the little leaks that you watch people chasing around the deck of a boat for a week's holiday, as it were.
Yeah. See, I'm an Apex qualified maintainer. How hard is it to get qualified as a maintainer, or how hard is the maintenance as an unqualified but just a qualified diver? Is there a big deal to do it?
No. So again, it depends. It depends on the person, doesn't it? So in a Mod 1 class, we'll do a limited amount of maintenance. You know, what you need to know to keep your rebreather ticking along, you know, in a normal year of ownership. In terms of then servicing, so JJ, for example, we'll talk JJ, that's what you're asking about. JJ has Apex valves. So the first stage is need to go to an Apex technician to get serviced. So that bit doesn't change. If you're an Apex technician, you know, tickety-boo, great. If you were not, then I would be saying you need to send them to a service technician, etc. Because, you know, I can only give the advice that Apex give out, and Apex don't sell their service kits to the general population. No. The rest of the rebreather, you can buy a service kit for. You're not buying it through the back door, you're not buying it off eBay or anything like that. So all the parts for that rebreather are available to you as a user. Now, a lot of it's really simple engineering, but that doesn't mean there aren't little knacks and tricks to it. So some people will pick all that up themselves. Other people will come over on a service days, usually in the winter, bring your own unit down, you service it. I'm there with you to service it. So if you get stuck, you know, show you the little tricks and knacks. Some people do that once and then do their own unit all the time. Some people do it once and decide that they never want to do it again. some people send it to someone like me to get it done. So when I run, if I use the service days as an example, the only things we don't touch on those service days are the first stages, because they need to go to, you send them to me. I'm an Apex technician, Apex dealer, but I don't do those with the clients, and we don't open the solenoid or obviously touch electronics. So I think if you need to have those looked at, then there's a limited amount you could do to your own solenoid. But if it's breaking the head open, then it's send it back to so I've done, for example, the factory course. And if a unit needs a new solenoid on, I'll change a solenoid, no problem at all. If a unit needs a new electrical board, I might know how to do it. The one thing that I know from knowing how to do it is I do not want to do that job, because if I'm not doing them every day, you don't have all the little knacks and tricks. And for the cost of a courier, you're better off getting it done properly. So I think home maintenance for certainly 75% of the rebreather and more if you do your own Apex first stages is more than doable.
Gleaming. Well, that's definitely a bit massive plus for me, because not that I'm a cheapskate at all. I just like to understand what I'm using and get into the ins and outs and the nitty gritty, because then when somebody says, what is this, or why is it doing that, or if it just happens to me, I can kind of have a much greater understanding of it. So I'd certainly be interested in doing one of them maintenance courses with you when the time is needed.
Yeah, I think the thing with those is, let's imagine you trained on the 1st of January. You should have, if you're starting your class with either a new unit or like if I sell a used unit, it's fully serviced, you should have a year's trouble-free motoring out of that. Beyond the normal day-to-day maintenance bits you need to do, bits you take on and off every day, the grease will come off, you need to redo them. So, do a year and then think about doing the sort of, there's no point in doing a maintenance course before it needs any maintenance, because you don't learn anything. You don't see anything. And also, you just need to learn a bit more about the unit over time to know what's what.
And then I suppose with that, you'll get all them little niggles and stuff that you can ask the right question when it comes to it, because I'd be almost ignorant at the end of the course about how it's going to perform for the way I dive in it. So when I come in a year's time, I'd have perhaps be more prepared to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. There would be little value in going straight into a class like that. So a year later is a good time to think about doing those. The unit will need it. You'll be ready for a little refresher on bits, and there's usually a good crack on those days, both in terms of getting the units done and usually doing the depth of the winter. It's nice to have a chat about diving and what's coming up, what you've done, what you're going to do, and
try and get some plans together and that as well, innit? Jump on someone else's trips.
Completely.
While I was doing some research and asking around, I've got a friend of mine who he got us into diving but lives out in Fuerteventura, so I don't see him often enough. And he's really the only mate that I go diving with regularly enough that dives a rebreather. So he's got the SF2 because he dives it side mount, and every now and again he'll put it back mount for whatever reason. So he said, why do you want that particular one? And you need to know this and that's that. And I've got a few points that if I ask the question wrong, just go with it and try and appease me a little bit. But so a BOV versus a DSV, so a bailout valve versus dive surface valve. What's the difference?
So a bailout valve is plumbed into your open circuit. DSV isn't. So it just opens and closes the rebreather. If you're buying a JJ-CCR, it only comes with a DSV. So in terms of training and the fact that we train on standard units, etc., you train on a unit with a DSV. That's not to say there aren't options available out there to add on later should you want to. You do impact the rebreather loop when you put a BOV on. So if we use the JJ as an example, the mouthpiece orifice on a JJ, I haven't got a just taking it to the garage, actually, there's some delivered the other day. So the orifice that you breathe through, ignore the mouthpiece for now, is bigger on a DSV than say a standard regulator. So if you go and put a BOV on there that has a smaller orifice on, you have changed the work of breathing. Now, you might not feel it. I might not feel it. Joe Bloggs, Dave from London might not feel it. But if you put it on an Ansty machine, which is where they test these things, then it will notice that. So that impacts that. Now, the thing that you're mitigating against really with a bailout valve is an immediate CO2 breakthrough, where you can't get your DSV out your mouth, put your bailout regulator in because you're breathing so fast. And there's a great video, it's on YouTube, the Sky Rebreather team incident, and I send it around to all my students, and you can see that happen. It's worth a Google. So the idea of the BOV is that you can just, BOV, you can turn the lever, bang, and you're on open circuit gas.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of pro, but you're now plumbed into a 3 litre of gas and you're still breathing like a steam train. So all you've done is, and this is my personal opinion, and you know what they say about opinions, and I also reserve the right to change my opinion, because I do believe with diving, then like with anything, you know, what we're teaching and saying today isn't what we were doing 10 years ago. No. Some of it is, but if you don't develop and evolve and improve, then, well, you're just like the old fuddy-duddy with their pipe, aren't they, going,
yeah,
you know, during the war, well, during the war, you know, that's not where we're at now. So, you know, what I say today might be different in 6 months if something has changed.
Yeah.
So your BOV's plumbed into your inboard. All you've done is move the problem. So that might be enough, but if you've truly got a CO2 breakthrough and you're breathing like that, that 3 litre ain't lasting long either. Oh. And you're still not going to want to take this out of the mouth. You can then go to other solutions. So I got crazy. You can plumb into your offboard cylinder. So now you've got your 7 litre or 11 litre down the side that you can plug into that. But this system now getting bigger and more complex. And bigger, more complex systems tend to have bigger, more complex problems. So the sort of JJ philosophy, and my philosophy in general, is, you know, it's the KISS thing, keep it simple, stupid. So I've got a rebreather that should be good for 3 hours in the water. You know, I know they can be done more and they can do less, but if we just say 3 hours, that's what it says in the book. And I've got my bailout, which should get me back from wherever I've been in the water. And it's a separate system. I'm not plugged into it. I'm not, you know, the rebreather's not reliant on it. If I had to throw my bailout away, in theory, I've still got my rebreather and I'm all right. You know, if the rebreather fails completely, I've got my bailout and I'm all right. So I like the keeping things separate. That still doesn't take away this major CO2 hit. But I'm afraid my opinion is if you have that major CO2 hit, then you're ratchet, basically.
Yeah.
So the thing we've got to do is make sure we don't have that major CO2 hit. Clearly, there are going to be other people that have had CO2 hits that are going to disagree with me. I also think, I mean, the internet is just a dangerous, dangerous place, isn't it? And my personal opinion, a lot of the CO2 hits you read about on the internet probably aren't CO2 hits. That doesn't mean bailing out was the wrong thing. You know, it definitely doesn't mean that. But if you think you're having a CO2 hit, you come off the rebreather and then we never go back to the rebreather to prove whether you were right or wrong. So it's always classed as a CO2 hit. So that's what the BOV.
Okay.
So if somebody turns up on a class to me and they say, Kieran, I must have a BOV, I'll go with it. You know, if it makes you happy, crack on. You know, if somebody says, I don't think I really need this BOV, Kieran, I'm like, yeah, no worries, don't have the BOV. So if somebody's coming with a JJ where we do need to train in standard units, you know, and they go, oh, I must have a BOV. All I'd say to them is like, let's do the class. And if you want to spend the €1,000 on a BOV at the end, at least you're doing it with some knowledge. You know, if you come into an JJ-CCR class, the BOV's standard. So it's there. So it's really not a be all and end all for me. But then that's not to say as well, you go and listen to Richard Harris talk about diving 200 meters in a 4 degrees cave, and you know, having the BOV that you can just do that is an absolute essential thing. You know, it makes perfect sense, but that's not what we're doing on Mod 1. 2 or even 3. So, and I think the other thing is, even if you have your BOV plumbed into the big bailout tank, you still got to get it out your mouth at some point, because you've got to switch to the other one by the time you're at that stage. And most of us are still going to need to switch, because you need to vent your rebreather. And most of us would do that with the loop above our head, as opposed to trying to tip yourself upside down and do that in a bailout. Well, I would anyway, in a bailout scenario. You know, that ironing board like trim, when your rebreather just shat itself at 75 metres and all you want is a big cuddle off your mum up on the boat. You'd be looking at the old seahorse, wouldn't you?
Yeah, mate, that's amazing.
Swimming for that rope. So that's my feeling on BOVs.
All right, love it. I've definitely learned a lot from that. I really have. From what I tried to read about it last night, obviously, you've painted a picture now that I can clearly understand, rather than sometimes just literature's for me, just it might as well be flipping Klingon. It didn't really ring true, but now that has, so thanks. I understand how a rebreather works. You know, I could explain it in really sort of layman's terms. And I kind of get how the work of breathing could be harder depending where your counter lungs are, whether they're below you, level with you, above you, behind you, whatever. So on this particular unit they're asking about, where are they? And do you like that in that unit compared to others?
Yeah, I do like it. So the JJ doesn't have, nor the Inspo, nor the XCCR, nor anything that really uses Dave Thompson's original lung design, which is what the JJ is built around. It's not a true back-mounted counter lung. It's an over-the-shoulder counter lung that runs behind you as opposed to over the front of you.
Okay.
So the object with any counter lung is the closer you can get it to the plane that your lungs are in, the better the work of breathing will be, because the hydrostatic imbalance is going to be smaller. So if we take a really extreme example here, and imagine I'm in the water now and I'm bolt upright. Well, whatever lung design I've got, the gas is going to be at the top of the lung. So if that is above my own lungs, so let's imagine it's up here, well, that's going to be really difficult to inhale, because the hydrostatic pressure on your chest is greater than on the counter lung, and it's going to be really easy to exhale.
Yeah.
And if you've ever sat in the water and tried to breathe your snorkel that little bit deeper, or tried to breathe through a hose pipe, that's the problem you're having. And the reverse is true. If the counter lung is deeper than you are, so let's say you're swimming along like this and you've got a chest-mounted counter lung, then the inhale is going to be really easy, because the pressure on the lung is greater than your own lungs, but the exhale is going to be difficult because you're having to push it into a greater pressure of water. And well, as you and I both know, 6 inches makes a difference, doesn't it? If 6 inches is a long way away. So if you move that counter lung, then even what we would perceive as a tiny difference makes a huge difference.
Okay.
Putting the counter lung behind you on paper makes the exhale easy and the inhale harder. Putting it in front of you, vice versa. But actually, with the counter lung design of any of the rebreathers, not just the JJ that you're looking at, they're trying to get that as close to your plane of lungs as possible. So if you're swimming along as a diver, let's make yourself look good. This is the body, this is the head. Your lungs are in this bit here. Whether you've got an over the shoulder running just behind you here or just in front of you, the idea is to get it as close to this plane as possible. Well, you can do all this work, and then when the diver does that, everything's changed. And what you definitely don't want to do is that. So you'll create massive hydrostatic imbalance trying to swim head down on a rebreather. Okay. And all the gas will be behind you and you're giving it that.
What's the difference between the different types of scrubbers? So you've got a radial and axial scrubber?
So an axial flows along the axis, and a radial flows across the radius. And most of the ones available that I can, so the XCCR, the Meg, they're all outside. I'm trying to picture the Meg in my head now. Yeah, outside to inside. So if you take the JJ as an example, it's CE'd with an axial can. You can get a radial can to put in it. They get a slightly longer duration. out of the Radial can, but then you also get slightly more softener line, actual scrubbing material into the can, which could account for the thing. A Radial, on average, would provide, I guess, a lower work of breathing than the equivalent Axial can.
When you say lower, is that does that mean easier?
Yeah. So if you can imagine, this is your Radial can, so the exhale gas is coming in through the side, heading to the centre. That distance there that the gas is being pulled across is relatively short, obviously along a large surface area. So there's less effort required than pulling it along an axis where it's all got to come through.
Yeah, I get it.
The flip side is the surface area on an axial can is constant. On a Radial can, you've got large surface area and decreasing. So its rate of decay will speed up as you get to as you consume the scrubber.
Right.
But I'm not a scientist. I am a diving instructor. Let's remember that.
So what does a JJ come with out of the two?
Axial. It's definitely easier to pack. So I would say packing the scrubber on the JJ Axial or an inspo is like a 2-minute segment of my life. Packing my JJ-CCR, I'll have a bead on. You know, you get the stool out and sit down for 10 minutes and crack on with it. It's definitely a bigger job.
What about electronic versus mechanical?
I don't actually think you've got a choice.
Is there no mechanicals knocking about then?
I don't think so. The Kiss is a completely mechanical rebreather.
Is that the Sidewinder?
The original, the Kiss Classic. There are other models I'm not brilliantly familiar with. The Revo's a hybrid, I think. The idea is you set the leaky valve to just below your metabolic rate. So you would just have to top up a tiny bit of oxygen periodically to keep the PO2, optimized. Yeah. You would have to work hard during an ascent to maintain the PO2. At a given depth, you shouldn't have to have too much input. An ECCR, you're going to tell it what PO2 to maintain, and then it should just maintain it. Either of them, you've got to monitor it. Definitely don't trust the machine. And something that I would really try to teach on a class is that you should be a thinking diver, and you should be expecting what the rebreather is going to do, not surprised when it does something. Or when it does something, you should expect it to have a result. And if you don't get that result, why haven't you got that result? So on a class, you would learn to dive your ECCR manually, but what you wouldn't have is the parachute, if you like, of that leaky valve behind you. Yeah. I genuinely don't. I don't even really mean in just ones that I sell. I don't think you really have a lot of choice in manual CCRs now. I think you'll be buying an ECCR. But then equally, has your car got ABS, aircon, you've got an iPhone, why not have those advantages if they're available?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I teach on ECCRs and I teach people to dive them as ECCRs because sometimes that's harder. Running a rebreather on it as an ECCR in the shallows, that gives you a good workout. But that's what you bought. So learn to dive it like that. Learn to dive it manually in failed mode as well. Yes, without question. But ECCR for me. Anyway. But I think you're with an ECCR by default because you have a choice.
Yeah. So what's a Tempstick?
Tempstick is available on Inspiration. There's a similar system on the Revo. They call it their RMS, I think. And the Sentinel has a Tempstick. So you put softener lime in the scrubber, and that's there to remove the CO2. It's a 2-stage reaction. The first stage, you get carbonic acid and heat, and the second stage, you get basically a chalk and distilled water. So the thought behind the Tempstick is if you can see where the heat in the scrubber is, you can see where the active front is. So if the scrubber's warm, it's active. If it's cold, it's it's not active. You then have got to extrapolate from that whether it's not active because it's spent or it's not active because it's been used. I like a Tempstick. If the Tempstick was available on a JJ, I'd have one. I think it can be a powerful tool in terms of understanding what your scrubber is doing. Okay. But it's not an option. So
so forget about that right now. If I want that resistive work of breathing, what's that?
Resistive would if you squashed a hose for design, overpack the scrubber, sitting at the surface with your wing fully inflated, your counterlung overinflated, that would all be resistive.
I get you.
I don't want to say fighting to breathe it, and certainly an increased work of breathing.
Okay.
Because it's going to be an extreme example when you go from perfect to unbreathable. You know, there's a sliding scale to get down to that point.
Right. Certainly on the JJ, you can get an international or a CE edition, but I don't think the KISS. Somebody recommended that to me the other day, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't have CE certification. So
it doesn't, to my knowledge. The KISS never got CE, and if we're talking the KISS Classic now, and again, I'm not knocking the KISS Classic as a unit to dive. But it will never get CE because it's a manual CCR. The way the CE reg is written, as I understand it, again, experts might come along. You've got an eCCR. If that fails, you've got a manual CCR. So you've got a safety net even if it's driven by yourself. Yeah. Whereas if you've got a manual CCR that fails, you've got no safety net. And there's worker breathing and other tests that they have to go through. So the international version, certainly with JJ, and I don't sell the international versions because all my business is in Europe, and everything you sell in Europe has to be CE'd. The international version you used to be able to buy without cylinders. You don't have to have M26 on the oxygen bottle. You used to be able to buy it without wing and backplate and things like that.
Right.
Whereas the CE version, you have to buy the version that's been CE'd. I'd have to look to see when the JJ first came out, it didn't have CE, so it didn't have a wing, it didn't have a backplate, so they weren't so worried about selling them then. But I would imagine now the international version is available without cylinders and without the M26. Yeah. Because the thing is, if you buy a rebreather and they ship it with cylinders from Europe, they're not legal in the US or Australia. Australia, anyway, you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be the only differences.
People that I know and don't really dive with a lot, so my sort of dive club, I've got the APs, and they're happy with them and they like them. That's cool. But for me, as soon as I saw that JJ at the dive show in February down at Coventry with Alan and Viv from TechWise in Malta, I know them quite well. We've been out with them a few times. So he had one, and I had a look over it, and I was like, "Yeah, this looks amazing." But why do I want it? And I think you've sort of ticked a lot of them boxes that I now have an understanding. But would you compare that unit to another and go, before you choose this, have a look at that?
I think your Inspiration, JJ, XCCR, Revo, Meg, the Liberty, SF2, they all fit in that same. I would put the Poseidon in a slightly different box. I think I would probably put the Prism 2 in a different box as well. Same functionality. They all, are doing something intrinsically very similar. Yeah. But that other group I would put in that sort of packaging as all very similar. So if you're sitting there saying the JJ is your preferred option, do you think there's anything else that's really close to it that you should look at? No, probably not. Because all I would be saying is the ones that sort of sit in the similar gas path is going to be your Inspiration. The XCCR is a similar but different. I think if you go down that route because you want the extra electronics, the CO2 sensor, the bailout valve as standard, it's got a big radial scrubber on it, but they're not all pros, No. So, like if you were ringing me up saying thinking about buying this 20-year-old Inspiration Classic or 5-year-old Poseidon thing, I'd probably try and talk you out of it. Not because the Inspiration Classic is a bad unit, it's just 20 years old now. I'd probably say something like this is better, but no, I think you've made it good.
What about buying second hand?
They're like buses.
Yeah.
So the JJ holds its value well, and it's a sought after unit. So when they come up, they tend to go very quickly, and sometimes they go for silly money.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't. But you've also got to look at what you're getting there. So I sell second-hand units as an example, and people compare what I sell to what they've seen on eBay or on Marketplace, and they're quite often not comparable. When you buy a unit from somebody like me, when you buy a unit from me, because I'm the only person I can speak for, that's like buying a car from a used car from a main dealer. It's had a full service, it's got tested cylinders, it's got sensors in it. You should pull that out the box on the day of your class and it be as close to having a new unit as is possible in terms of mechanical sounds. And, I think you're buying with confidence there and go from that. I'd say to anyone buying any sort of second-hand unit, if you have to add $1,000 to it, is it still a good buy? Because if it needs some work doing to it, you can easily eat up £1,000. So if you add that to it, is it still a good buy? So if you're buying something that needs 2 cylinders testing, complete unit service, first, ignore the fact that you might do some of this yourself, first stage service, 3 new sensors, new batteries, maybe a new solenoid. The solenoid's rusty. There's £600 without even having to break into anything else. So the second-hand market is good. It keeps the diving going, and equally, if you have something, you want to know that you can sell it, and there is a market for that sort of thing. But I would research it well. And something I definitely say to students is, if you're arriving with a second-hand unit, please make sure that whether it's serviced by me or another service centre or whatever, please make sure that that's good to go. Because if there's 2 of you on a class, and let's use the extreme example, one person's got a brand new unit, somebody else rocks up with an eBay purchase, we can do what we can to help if it's not working properly, but you can't keep this other person back because somebody's arrived with a hunk of junk, and I'm really honest about that up front.
What's the sort of turnaround to order a new one?
We would want to be getting, for an October course, we'd want to be getting an order in now. So 6 to 8 weeks is the norm. There is a sensor crisis at the moment because if you can repurpose ventilator sensors for rebreathers, you make a few quid at the moment. But that's the reality. Is the sensors we use in rebreathers share many components and are built by the same companies that build medical sensors. So understandably and justifiably, production in the first half of this year was ramped up to meet demand for ventilators. And that's not just UK demand, that's going to have been global demand. There aren't masses of companies building these things. So we should definitely get in the queue. I am lucky that I know a lot of people with units and things. So where we've been stuck this year, I've been able to borrow sensors to do stuff. But that wouldn't be perfect for a class, because when you finish a class, you don't want to be returning the sensors. You want to be going off and diving your unit.
Absolutely.
All the signs are that supply should start to come online. So I think October is a realistic goal for that.
Well, I've gone through all my list here. Is there anything that you think I should have asked that I've not asked? I've asked the right questions? In
terms of for general info, I think you've asked the right question. We've certainly talked about all the stuff we would normally go through. I think just the marketplace is changing. Everyone knows helium's now so unaffordable and so difficult that if you want to go gas diving, you need to get a rebreather. It's no longer the argument that it'll be cheaper than buying open circuit gas. Open circuit gas just isn't viable anymore. The logistics and the money just mean it's not viable. So rebreather diving is expensive, but if you want to do those dives, it's the only way forward to do them. If you want to travel the globe, travel the UK and do some kick-ass diving along the way beyond recreational depths or durations, then it's brilliant. If you want to interact with marine life without a stream of bubbles going up above you, then it's brilliant. But it will require more input than OC. But like most things in life, the more you put in, the more you get out, I think the only thing I would say, and I say this to everyone, is when you first get your rebreather, as far as physically possible, you want to put your open circuit kit in a box and just forget about it for a while. I'm not saying get rid of it all.
Yeah.
Because even if the dive doesn't demand the rebreather, you need the rebreather because you need to learn it. So the rebreather isn't the most practical thing for a 10-meter dip, but you need the learning and this is post course. Yeah. The problem is if you run in from work and you go, oh shit, I'll just grab the open circuit kit. You grab the open circuit kit, and then that's a week since you dived your rebreather, and then the next week the weather's shit, so you don't get a dive. Then the week after that, it's a 30 or 40 meter dive, and then it's, oh, I haven't been on the rebreather for 3 weeks now. I'll just take the open circuit kit again, and you've just broken the chain. So you know, when you've done 50, 100, 150, 200 hours or whatever, you can put it down, come back to it. You haven't forgotten everything. You know, when you've got 14 hours, it's. And the other thing I would say to people is, do not take training if you then know you're not going to be able to use it for 4 months. So like the guys that trained just before lockdown, I mean, what a just not ideal at all, because you come out of the course ready to go, raring to go, and then it's like, no, you can't play for 2 months. And your skill drop off in that time is massive. So,
well, I'd quite happily dive through the winter. You know, my biggest issue is getting cold. And certainly I've used the winter to try and practice my underwater photography, going solo diving up at Cape and Ray or whatever, because no one will come with me. But I'm probably more cold because I'm just sort of hovering there for as long as I can to take a photo. Yeah. So I'm cold because of that. Perhaps, you know, so I have stepped up my game with my... I
think the rebreather will help with heat loss. I don't think you'll feel any warmer on it.
No.
You're not going to put it on. But the fact that you're getting gas, so your scrubber will be at 40 degrees after about half an hour.
Yeah.
So that gas going in and out of the body is broadly going to be the same temperature. So you're not getting that cold shoot down that you get with open circuit. But yeah, things have changed, haven't they? You know, it's fashionable to have good buoyancy control now.
Yeah.
25 years ago, you just swam all the time. So you never got cold because you were always swimming.
Yeah.
And, you know, you only dive for 25 minutes in the winter because it was cold. But now you bought a rebreather, you want to do an hour and you want to sit there with your camera taking macro, neutrally buoyant. But there's good thermal kit out there. There's good electrical heating kit. And, you know, that's the other thing. If, as and when you book the class, you know, you'll get some info sent through to you. And one of the bits there talks about being dry and warm. Doesn't matter if it's the summer or the winter. People rock up having spent $8,500 on a rebreather with a dry suit that's like a sieve. I mean, what is the point?
Yeah.
You are not. You've bought a piece of equipment to enable you to dive more, and you're limited by, if you're cold and wet, who wants to do anything? So
I get that. Yeah. Happy days. Well, I really appreciate your time, mate. Thanks very much. And no doubt once I've had my chat on this side, I'll certainly get back to you and we'll sort out whatever we need to sort out. So
hang on.
Nice one, mate. I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, have a good one.
Take it easy. Bye-bye. So that brings us to an end of episode 25 with my friend Kieran Hatton. Links to all the things we discussed are in the podcast notes. You've been listening to Are You a Scuba Diver? Fancy a Brew podcast with me, Andy the Northern Diver. You can find more scuba related content on my YouTube channel and the link is in the podcast notes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a 5-star review. And if there's someone or something you'd like us to discuss, let us know via our Facebook page. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one.